Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing marvellously well. I'm doing great, thank you very much. And loads of love to you, and I hope you're having a fabulous evening and that you're going to get yourself something lovely to drink, because I've got a fabulous story for you. So let's get started with tonight's story, shall we? Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. It is an ordinary day at the Oregon coast, and a beautiful day it is too. The sky is a serene cup of blue, without a fluffy cotton wool cloud in sight, as Sylvia is smiling brightly when she carries her beautiful 6-month baby boy in his portable Moses basket to the beach. She is walking side by side with her husband Dusty, who is a well-built, handsome young man, boasting a tattoo of his wife on one of his arms, with a caption underneath the tattoo which reads, "Mine forever," which does make people raise an eyebrow or two when they see it. He is as proud as Punch to be a father, and is wearing a very contented smile on his face. He has told anyone who will listen that he's a father because he wants the whole world to know that he has fathered a baby boy whom he hopes will be a chip off the old block. This morning he's sporting a pair of denim knee-high shorts and a snug-fitting bright orange golfing shirt, and his pretty wife is wearing a floating creamy summer dress covered in pink peony flowers, and her long blonde hair, with its auburn highlights, is blowing back in the breeze like the stunning hair you see on L'Oreal advertisements for shampoo. Sylvia looks beautiful this morning, her peachy skin gleaming, her blue eyes sparkling. Too bad they look a little melancholic. If her husband Dusty is being completely honest with himself, he knows that he is responsible for putting the sadness in his wife's eyes, but he perpetually persuades himself that he's going to change big time. But his promises that he makes to himself, like the New Year's resolutions people make every year, have a nasty habit of losing their potency and becoming as diluted as many other promises people tend to make themselves. And Dusty is a master artist at persuading himself that tomorrow will be a brand new day, not adulterated by the grey, rather grim stains of his regret. "What brought this all on?" Sylvie, he asks, looking at her through narrowing eyes that hint of suspicion, as they casually saunter along the beach together, walking side by side in bare feet, kicking up the sea sand and enjoying the fragrant scent of the salt in the air. A couple of seagulls soar above them, shrieking. The sound of the waves crashes violently against the shoreline. It's very tranquilizing to the couple, who both love and adore the Oregon coast. Dusty is carrying an icebox containing a few beers and some soft drinks in his right hand, and in his left hand he's carrying a small picnic basket, while his wife diligently carries the Moses basket. He's not used to any romantic overtures on his wife's part, who's always retreating from him rather than embracing him these days. She seems to have become like a frosty ice queen towards him of late, which he finds incredibly frustrating and terribly annoying. He's seen the fear in her eyes when he closes in for a hug, for she visibly flinches, as if she's expecting him to lash out at her like an angry cat with razor-sharp claws. Sometimes Sylvia makes him feel like a monster. All right, he will admit he's got a bit of a temper on him that seems to become heightened every time he's had a drink or two, when for some reason the smallest thing can make him erupt like a volcano. But he can't help it if his wife Sylvia winds him up the wrong way. So if he gets capriciously belligerent from time to time towards her, it's hardly his fault. He's done things he wishes he could take back, when the indelible reminders of his punches can be seen by the bruises on his wife's body. He can't help it if he's got very high standards and is punctilious, liking things to be done a certain way. And his wife can be so sloppy at times, and that drives him mad. And then sometimes he just loses it and lashes out. But the main thing is he never intended to do it. It's an impulsive knee-jerk reaction, and he can hardly be blamed for that. If Sylvia did things right, none of this need ever happen. "I must confess, I'm rather surprised with your spontaneity today, Sylvia, requesting a picnic on the beach of all things.
It's most unlike you to be like this. But what a beautiful day it is, and I think it's a grand idea."
Sylvia manages a stiff, rather wry smile, even though it hurts to smile, due to the bruising on her face that she has masterfully covered with concealer, that she is so tired of telling people at the restaurant where she works as a waitress that she's bumped into the door again for the zillionth time. When she tells them she's such a klutz, the waitressing and managerial staff at the restaurant roll their eyes knowingly at each other, because there's only so many times you can walk into a door before your excuses begin to fall onto mute ears. Her work colleague took her to one side recently, after observing her black eye, and said gingerly, "Sylvia, listen to me, girl. You don't need to pretend to me, or to any of us for that matter. I know exactly what's going on with your husband. Everybody knows what Dusty Cladessa is like. If there's any brawl in this town, your husband is usually behind it. Most people describe Dusty as a thug. I don't know why you don't leave him, Sylvie. File for a restraining order against him. Everybody knows that you did not walk into a door, so you can quit protecting that deplorable husband of yours. Dusty should be ashamed of himself for laying a hand on you. Any man who beats up a woman is not a man in my book, but a monster. You shouldn't stay with someone who treats you like this. If you ever need a safe place to stay, you only have to ask. You're welcome to come to my apartment any time you like. And you can stay there as long as you like, until you find a safe place to stay." Sylvia had been unable to hold back the tears, brought on by her work colleague's kindness, which she hurriedly wiped away with the back of her sleeve. "Dusty's not always a monster, you know," she tried to reassure Zalia, who does not look remotely convinced by her valiant persuasions. "I promise you, Dusty has got some redeeming qualities, but sometimes he just lashes out. He gets so mad by the smallest thing." Zalia had shrugged her shoulder. "I don't know how to say this to you, Sylvia, but from where I'm standing, I think you need to get out of your relationship with Dusty. One day you might not be nursing just a black eye. One day he might actually kill you. And I don't say that lightly. If one day you just suddenly disappear off the face of the earth, everybody will know that Dusty disposed of your body." Sylvia's eyes grew as round as saucers at Zalia's brazen remarks, which she knew were true. She dabbed her eyes sorrowfully with a tissue. "You don't understand, Zalia. You really don't. You're looking at my situation from the other side of the fence, but you're not inside. You're not privy to what goes on under the roof of my home. If I stay with my husband, yes, I admit, there's a strong possibility I could get killed when Dusty loses it one day and things go badly awry. But if I leave him, I'm already dead. And that's a guarantee. Because if I dare leave him, Dusty's ego will be so shattered, he'll kill me for daring to leave him in the first place. If you ask my husband to show you the tattoo on his arm, you'll see the level of how obsessed he is with me. He's got a tattoo of me on his arm. He literally thinks he owns me. That's the way he sees me, as a possession, as a thing, not as a person. He's told me himself that if I ever leave him, I'm a dead woman. And I know it's true. I absolutely believe him." Zalia shuddered in horror. "You've really got yourself in a sticky mess here, Sylvia, and you need to get out of it. You really do. You should go to the police and file that restraining order, but I know you won't. So all I want to say to you is, just so you know, I'm always here for you, and I've always got an apartment open to you whenever you need it." "Thanks, Zalia," said Sylvia. "You really are a trooper. I appreciate it." It would seem that despite Sylvia's very best efforts to hide the fact that her husband Dusty was inclined to become violent after a few drinks, it certainly hadn't escaped the townsfolk attention. In the small town where they lived, everybody knew what Dusty Cladessa was like. By all accounts, Dusty had been in trouble with the police over a plethora of times for drunk and disorderly behaviour, and had earned a formidable reputation as one of the less desirable characters you would do well to avoid. It would seem that no one in their right mind would want to rub Dusty Claudessa up the wrong way, for there would be repercussions if you did such a thing. Dusty Claudessa had been recently questioned in regards to the mysterious disappearance of a local man that had gone missing coincidentally a day after Dusty had been threatening to take his life. There had been many witnesses to this unfortunate brawl that had occurred outside a local bar in town, and had not been pretty. The man that Dusty had beaten up to a pulp had left with a notable limp in his leg and a bloody nose, and had thought better of filing any charges against Dusty, fearing any repercussions. The next day his wife had reported him missing. Witnesses had heard Dusty saying,
"You better watch your back. Next time I'll bloody kill you."
Dusty had now become a person of extreme interest in this police investigation. The brawl had been sparked from a single conversation where one of the patrons had happened to make a derogatory comment.
"I mean, who does that?"
Dusty had overheard him say to his friend at the bar, as they were enjoying a couple of beers together.
"My wife told me the man had his wife's picture inked on his arm, and there's a caption under it that reads, 'She's mine forever.' I didn't believe a word of it myself, until I happened to be standing behind him at the baker's to pick up some sesame bagels. And sure enough, there was his tattoo, larger than life. My bet is that man is as controlling as hell. He could have had something written under his tattoo like, 'Our love forever.' Instead, 'She's mine forever.' And that strikes me as warped."
The other man had rubbed his moustache reflectively.
"It's not the tattoo that concerns me. That's benign, irrelevant really. It's the wife I feel sorry for. Pretty ethereal thing she is, as delicate as a porcelain doll that could so easily break, which I suspect is the real reason why Dusty Claudessa was attracted to her in the first place, as a bully enjoys breaking up the fragile things in life. I've seen his wife Sylvia around the place from time to time. My bet is he beats the living daylights out of the poor woman. I saw her in here recently. She was nursing a broken wrist. My bet is he pushed her over. Gladys, a friend of mine who works at the tavern where Sylvia waitresses, says she's always claiming to have tripped and fallen over something, or bumped into a door, because she's always got bruises, but everybody knows what really is going on there. I wish that woman would file restraining orders against that man. He wants locking up, he does. Real men don't behave like this."
Dusty, on overhearing the conversation, had boldly walked over to the two men.
"This looks like a cosy conversation that you're having about me. And I was thinking it was only women who liked to gossip. Seems like I got that wrong," he said sarcastically. "Got nothing better to do with your sad little lives than discuss my relationship with my wife that has got nothing to do with the both of you."
He grabbed one of the startled men by the collar, dragging him out of the bar, while everybody watched in abject horror, and someone sagaciously called the police.
"I heard you nattering about me in the bar," Dusty had screamed indignantly. "And for the record, let's get one thing straight. I don't beat my wife up." "If you say so," said the gutsy man. "But the bruises on your wife's body tell a different story, Dusty. Do they not? They speak for themselves."
The two men had engaged in a punch-up.
"Don't you ever talk about my wife again. Do you understand?"
Dusty had shrieked. The man had stood his ground and said,
"It's not right, bro, what you do to your wife, Sylvia. Everyone knows you beat her up, like you're beating me up now. You do like settling your scores with your fists, don't you, Dusty? It's the only currency that you seem to understand."
Dusty had virtually growled at the man and had waved a warning finger at him.
If I hear you ever talking about my relationship with Sylvia again, I will tear you apart, limb from limb. Do you understand? You're a walking dead man."
He had left the forlorn, rather beleaguered, beaten-up patron, covered in blood, standing rather bemused on the pavement, staring blankly into space, as if disorientated and confused, while he had wantonly sauntered off in his truck with a thunderous gait, without a single care in the world for what he'd done. And then he'd driven away in his decrepit old battered truck, leaving behind him a trail of dirty smoke. And when the police arrived on the scene, Dusty Cladessa had long gone. But a day later, the patron he'd threatened to kill, whom he'd beaten up so badly, leaving him with a limp to his step, a bloody nose, and a slight concussion from a bad bump to the head, had simply vanished into thin air without any explanation, and his wife had reported him missing, and the sheriff, as well as all the townsfolk, did not believe in stunning coincidences like this, and all were absolutely certain that Dusty Cladessa was behind the patron's mysterious vanishing. The police had been sniffing around Dusty like a cadaver dog over a corpse, but they had nothing on him, well, not yet, to make an arrest. But Dusty hated the police with a burning passion and always gave them a wide berth whenever possible, especially after the town sheriff had said to him warningly, "I'm watching you, Dusty, and don't you forget that for a moment. Sooner or later you're going to slip up, because I know you have something to do with Wyatt Engelman's disappearance, and I am going to make that arrest sooner or later." Dusty, with an arrogant snigger, had said, "You've got nothing on me, Sheriff." But there had been a look between the two men, a look the sheriff had discerned in other guilty men he'd arrested over the years. It was a "yes, I did it" look, but you'll never catch me look. Dusty had been married to Sylvia for 5 years. At first his wife was having fertility problems during the first few years of their marriage, which had been grievously annoying and frustrating for Dusty, because he had in mind that he'd like a big family, with a plethora of children, but his wife Sylvia seemed incapable of falling pregnant, and one day it had happened, and Dusty could not believe how their luck had changed so fortuitously. He had no way of knowing that his wife Sylvia had secretly been taking birth control pills for years behind his back, clandestinely keeping her stash of pills in a rusty old paint can in the yard shed. If Dusty ever learnt about her duplicity, she knew she was almost certainly dead. But after she'd broken her ankle, after Dusty had knocked her over, it would seem her trips to the yard shed to retrieve her pills had been curtailed, and as a result she had fallen pregnant.
"Things will be much better now that I'm about to become a father,"
Dusty had told Sylvia, rubbing his hands with glee.
"Just you wait and see."
He had taken Sylvia's hand into his large one and given it a tight, affectionate squeeze.
"I'll turn over a new leaf, Sylvia. See if I don't. Since Howie has been born, I've become a new man, and I'm taking my responsibilities as a father seriously, and I want to be a very good father to our son, and set a good example to him."
Sylvia glanced briefly at her husband, regretting how she'd fallen for such a handsome man all those years ago. Even though they'd been together for 8 years and married for 5, it felt like an entire lifetime, because the hours in every day seemed to have dragged on forever with Dusty. She was now paying a heavy price tag for being so masterfully seduced by such a good-looking face, like the stunning veneer of a magnificent building that you find was only ever made of plyboard and was really just a flimsy stage set, not made out of anything enduring or substantial. What a complete idiot she had been, the envy of all her school friends, who lived in the quirky town of New Hope, situated on the Delaware River on the border of Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Sylvia thought she had hit the jackpot dating such a perfect-looking man that had made the girls drool over him like maple syrup over a waffle. It had made her feel incredibly proud that the likes of Dusty Cladessa was interested in her. Little did she know, like a lion moving in on its prey, that she was the kind of woman that Dusty Cladessa knew he could control. She was vulnerable, naive, whimsical, trusting and delicate. In Sylvia's deceived eyes, everything about Dusty Cladessa was perfect. His face was idealistically symmetrical, his hair a natural highlighted mix of blondes and browns, his skin a golden brown colour that perfectly accentuated his cornflower blue eyes that were framed by thick eyelashes. Sylvia, known to her friends as Sylvie, had run away with Dusty when she was only 18 years old, and had always regretted the day she had blown all caution to the wind. The echoes of her parents' warning voices remained in her head, telling her that Dusty Cladessa was bad news indeed. But in her mulishly stubborn denial, she had refused to heed their salient warnings. In those former, seductive, rather romantic years, Dusty Cladessa had artfully persuaded Sylvia, with his silvery tongue and magnanimous kind gestures, that he was the perfect all-American boy, whom would give her a great life, the life she always dreamed of, if they were to run away together and get married, and that she would never want for anything again. Even at a young age, Dusty Cladessa had made a lot of money, fixing up old cars for a living, so he'd built up a sizable amount of money for them to run away with. "Sweetheart," Sylvia's mother had told her, "I know Dusty Cladessa looks like he should be a hunky firefighter on a calendar or something like that. Granted, he's a very handsome young man, he is. I'll give you that. But I want to assure you that not all pretty things are good on the inside, and you would do well to remember that. What do they say? Don't judge the book by its cover. Just because it looks good on the outside does not mean it makes good reading material at all. And more's the pity that you cannot see it for yourself. You're terribly young and naive, sweetheart, with a whole lot to learn about this world of ours. You forget, Sylvia, I was your age at one point in time, believe it or not. And I wasn't always ruled by common sense, I'm afraid to say. So I made some catastrophic mistakes as far as men are concerned, in my time, down the bumpy, tumultuous road of life. And yes, I learnt some hard lessons along the way, until I was fortunate enough to meet your father. And I just don't want you to make the dreadful mistakes I made when I was young." "Mum," said Sylvia, contorting her face in abject disgust, "I'm 18 years old. I'm not 3. Quit treating me as if I'm 3 years old. Dusty is a great boy. He's got so much going for him. He's making lots and lots of money, but you seem determined to hate him by saying all these mean, unkind things about him. I've met the boy of my dreams, and I'd like to think you'd be happy for me. I may be 18, but I think I'm a pretty good judge of character." Her mother had raised a cynical brow. "Do you, dear? I beg to differ, I'm afraid. At your age, I think you're whimsically seeing what you want to see, through rose-coloured spectacles, because you're a natural romantic at heart, and you envisage yourself being swept away by a handsome prince, like in the fairy tales. But I'm here to tell you, sweetheart, that life does not work out like that. I'm going to tell you something that should make your hair curl. Do you remember old Mr. Penbridge?" "What about Mr. Penbridge, Mum? I don't see what he has got to do with Dusty, even though he was Dusty Cladessa's next-door neighbour for a long time. But of course I remember him. I see him around often enough at the local library. He takes out tons of library books. He and his wife are keen readers. They read every Sunday for the entire day in their living room. Detective novels, I'm told." Mrs. Jenkins washed her hands in the kitchen sink, drying them with a dishcloth, her blue eyes clouding over with sadness. But she knew she needed to tell her capriciously belligerent teenage daughter, who could be both standoffish, defensive and rebellious at the best of times, like any typical cantankerous teenager, what Mr. Penbridge had revealed to her about Dusty Cladessa. She knew she needed to proceed cautiously, as at 18 years old, Sylvia could become very reactive if you told her something she didn't want to hear. She paused for a brief moment, holding her daughter's steely gaze. "Go on," said Sylvia. "I know you're dying to tell me, Mum, so spit it out, why don't you?" "Well, when I bumped into Mr. Penbridge, he asked after you.
He's always had a soft spot for you, Sylvia. His wife says you were one of her favourite pupils at junior high."
"Let me guess," said Sylvia, preempting what her mother was going to say. "You're going to tell me that Mr. Penbridge was bad-mouthing Dusty and didn't have anything good to say about my boyfriend. That's pretty predictable. Let's hear it."
"He's concerned about you, my dear, as are me and your father, with good reason. We don't want you getting mixed up with the likes of Dusty Cladessa. He's an unsavoury character. Mr. Penbridge is not the first person to have told us some less than agreeable, reassuring things about Dusty Cladessa. He was warning us that Dusty is not all he seems at face value. He grew up in a dysfunctional, volatile home, and I'm afraid, like it or not, that influences the stability of a child when he grows up. His father was always beating up on his mother, I believe. I gather she divorced him when Dusty was very small, moving away, leaving Dusty to be raised by his dad. So I do admit that your boyfriend had a tough start in childhood, with his mother out of the picture. But Mr. Penbridge lived right next door to the Cladessa family, and would always hear fighting and arguing. And one occasion there were gunshots going off in that house. Mr. Penbridge called the police, but the Cladessas claimed it was nothing."
"That's because his dad was a loser," said Sylvia. "Dusty told me all about him. I know all about the arguments they had together. That's why Dusty lives in his own apartment now and hasn't spoken to his dad in years. When he sees him, he crosses over to the other side of the road. So what you're telling me is old news." Sylvia's mother grimaces when she hears her daughter's nonchalant, insouciant remarks, spoken by a girl who has behind her no life experience whatsoever, rather like a caterpillar on a leaf that knows nothing about life as a butterfly, but focus only on the leaf before him, as that is all he knows. If you told that caterpillar about flying, he'd laugh at you and say,
"Me flying? Are you kidding? That could never happen."
Sylvia's naivety is hard for Mrs. Jenkins to swallow. How she wishes her daughter could be more shrewd and discerning. She knows that abused people can often become the abusers later on in life. She bites her lips and wrings out her hands, like the washing, which she does as a self-soothing gesture, to iron away her nerves, as what she has to tell her daughter next won't be easy.
"There is more to the story, I'm afraid, Sylvia."
Sylvia makes a face and groans at her mother.
"What else did he have to say, Mum? That Dusty's a wizard conjuring up spells or something? Or did he tell you he smokes pot? Go on, let's hear it," she says, clapping her hands sarcastically. "There is no need to be sarcastic, Sylvia. You need to hear what I have to say." "Then say it, for goodness sake, Mum." "Mr. Penbridge caught your boyfriend, Dusty Cladessa, when he was 14 years old or so, trying to drown a bag of over 8 little kittens in the lake, just for fun. Mr. Penbridge was absolutely furious about it. He snatched the bag of kittens away from Dusty, asking him what the hell he was doing. And you know what Dusty said? 'I was taking them for a swim in the lake, sir, but I wouldn't harm them.' He phoned up Dusty's father to tell him about what his son had done, and Dusty's father said, 'Good job, getting rid of Vernon like that. I never did like cats.' It would seem even his own father had no heart for the poor little mites. Mr. Penbridge believed that Dusty was getting a macabre kind of sick satisfaction from making those kittens suffer. Because he's not right in the head, sweetheart. People who treat animals badly are not well. Mr. Penbridge went out of his way to ensure that each kitten found a lovely new home. But he described the vindictive look on Dusty's face as a 14-year-old boy as grievously unsettling for him. You may say, Sylvia dear, that he was young at the time, but that is no excuse to behave like that. Most 14-year-old kids treat animals with respect. If Dusty was capable of doing something so evil, you have to ask yourself, dear, what else is he capable of? I know he's presenting a good face to you, Sylvia, so that you fall passionately in love with him. That's exactly what he wants. But when the two of you get married one day, and he gets comfortable with you, like an old pair of slippers that he wears every day, there is no telling how he might treat you. Think about the way his father treated him. It could turn on you, and it could turn ugly, Sylvia. You really must listen to me."
"Mr. Penbridge was lying," said Sylvia. "Dusty would never ever do something like that. Dusty's a good person. I don't believe he'd ever harm an animal. You're making this all up to put me off going out with him because you never ever liked him. All you want to do is ruin my life, Mum. It's so typical of you. Why can't you be happy for me?"
"I would be happy for you, dear, if Dusty was a reliable gentleman. But he's not, dear, and the sooner you realize that, the better. You need to wake up." Mr. Jenkins, Sylvia's devoted father, whom had been reading the newspaper in the kitchen at the table, folded up the paper into a square and tossed it onto the chair on his left-hand side. He tentatively looked up at his daughter, with kind hazel eyes, wrought with worry that were framed by his tortoiseshell glasses. He removed the glasses pensively from his eyes and folded them up into a leather case, and let out a huge, exasperated sigh. "We are not trying to destroy your happiness, Sylvia. That is the last thing me and your mother want for you. Like any well-meaning parents, we want the very best for you, because we love you. You are our daughter. You are our pride and joy. Me and your mother are trying our level best to be a lighthouse in your life, guiding you away from tempestuous seas and rocky waters. We're not setting out to shipwreck your relationship with Dusty Cloudessa. But what we are doing is warning you to proceed with caution. If Dusty was beaten up by his father, he might end up beating you, because he grew up in that dysfunctional environment, and he saw that as the norm. It's very common for that to happen. We don't want you to end up becoming his punching bag. Think about it long and hard, Sylvia. If Dusty Cloudessa attempted to drown a bag of over 8 kittens in his teens, it shows you that he's likely a narcissistic personality type. Someone who has no compassion. I don't want any daughter of mine getting harpooned by a man like that, because you might not escape his grasp."
"Why are you both being so horrible? And you too, Dad," said Sylvia defiantly. "You're as bad as Mum, Dad. You just don't want me to be happy with Dusty. That's why you're making up all these horrible lies about him that are not true. You're making it all up. He'd never ever hurt a kitten. I bet if I ask Dusty about those kittens, he'll say it never happened and that Mr. Penbridge made it all up."
"I'm sure he would. But why would Mr. Penbridge do that, dear? He wants you to be happy like me and your mother do. He gave your mother a cautionary warning about Dusty Cloudessa because he cares about you."
"You and Mum make me sick to the stomach," said Sylvia. "Conspiring against me like this, it's disgusting. Trying to break me and Dusty apart. You're cruel, you're mean, you're horrible, and I hate you. Dusty would never hurt a fly. Why are you lying about him? He's so good to me. He buys me flowers, expensive gifts, treats me like a lady. And you're making out he's a monster. I hate you. I hate you." Sylvia had marched out of the room in indignation, only to leave a note for her parents a few days later, telling them she'd gone away with Dusty Cloudessa and never wanted to see them again as long as she lived. But now, all these years later, she missed her parents desperately, but was way too proud to pick up the telephone to tell them so. Her parents had been absolutely right about Dusty Cloudessa, and so had Mr. Penbridge. Dusty was a chip off the old block, exactly like his own father, and she could imagine him easily trying to drown a bag of 8 kittens, which was why Sylvia, who adored animals, refused to even get her a dog or a cat, as she was quite sure that Dusty would end up killing the creature in a moment of unbridled rage, or to get his revenge on her by teaching her a lesson. Sylvia had sometimes phoned her parents just to hear her dad answer the telephone. Tears would come into her eyes, as she heard his voice.
"Hello? Hello, is anybody there?"
She'd hear him say to her mother,
"It's another one of those funny calls, I'm afraid, my dear."
"Oh dear," her mother would say, "you do get some sick people in this world, don't you? Who get their kicks from cranking people, I'm afraid." Sylvia would put down the phone with tears in her eyes. How she missed her lovely life in Philly, in her quaint, prepossessing hometown, where people cared about their neighbours, but there was no going back now. So there we are. That's the end of part 1 of our story. Part 2 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.